Welcome to Vision 360, where we look at cybersecurity from every angle, starting with the foundation and extending through corporate governance and beyond. I am your host, Matthew Webster, and I focus on solving cybersecurity governance by helping organizations align security with business strategy. That means emphasizing governance, resilience, communication, emotional intelligence, and practical risk management. My approach is shaped by decades of experience in the field, including several chief information security officer roles. I've worked with leadership teams through training, workshops, assessments, and direct advisory support, always with the goal of making cybersecurity a strategic asset and not a technical afterthought. Today, I am honored that Tim Leech is joining us. Tim is recognized as a thought leader in governance, risk, and assurance. He sat at the forefront of challenging and rethinking traditional models, including the widely discussed and used 3 lines model. He's also a strong advocate for the 5 lines of assurance, a framework that addresses some of the gaps he's seen in practice. That said, there's no way I could adequately introduce his background. So with that in mind, Tim, would you mind introducing yourself more fully?
Thanks, Matthew. Yeah, my experience has been shaped. I graduated as a CA a long time ago in 1981. So that then followed with 3 years of internal auditing, where I did internal auditing the traditional way, where you go in and analyze some aspect of management and write up audit findings, management, internal control deficiencies. Then I was promoted to management positions out at Gulf Canada and Calgary. And that was where I really started to experience cybersecurity, the area that you particularly. I ran systems. My first position was running Gulf's capital system, which pushed about $2 billion worth of spending a year through that system. But that same post, I was responsible for all of Gulf Canada's proved and probable reserve disclosures and SEC filings. And it really started, it said to me, hey, how do I know that those data sets that I'm responsible for aren't being impacted by cybersecurity issues? And it can be malicious or it can be innocent. I mean, some of the biggest IT failures are accidental. They're not malicious. They're just big screw-ups where they're relying on a formula that's wrong or some generated code that produces incorrect data. So, those are that I got my exposure with systems acceptance started in those, and then I moved on to running the oil accounting system, which pushed through $2 billion of revenue a year, and you paid freehold royalties to hundreds and hundreds of people that were highly determinant on the accuracy of the calculation and the standing data, which was a term I was taught way back from Cooperson Library. And I don't know if they still use the word standing data, but it always made sense to me. These were the core numbers that were used in calculations that had to do with sensitivity. So that gave me a sense, and then I went back to internal audit, and that was where I really, it became clear to me that the whole internal audit model of going out and identifying management's internal control deficiencies using, quote, risk-based audit plans that often didn't go anywhere near what was really important to the company. I mean, in Gulf Canada, the internal audit department had never audited how the company achieves target-proofed reserve increases. So when you looked at what was really important to the business, that internal audit department hadn't done much of that. And my general auditor wanted me to tackle oil and gas loss control, which internal audit had historically never tackled. And that was when I said to him, I can do audits the old way. We can write up dozens and scores of deficiencies in the area of oil and gas loss control. But that's not solving the real problem. It should be our management people that feel that they're responsible for getting, full credit for all the oil and gas we produce.
Sure.
And that was what I proposed control and risk, objective-centric control and risk self-assessment. And that was in 1985. Um, we proposed it to the CEO. He said, makes good sense to me, go do it. So we did, and we started to write about it, and other companies all over the world. We started to get, hey, this is a great idea. This is a whole different role for audit, working with management to help them understand the risk that they're taking in pursuit of important objectives. So
that brings up a really interesting point that you're talking about right there, because internal audit, but definitely you want to make sure that you're free of conflicts. Where would you say that is the optimal place in the reporting structure of an organization? Of course, it depends on the size of the organization and the context, but where would you like to see it optimally sit within an organization and why?
well, that would catapult me from where I was in the story, which was 1985, 86 to today. And today, the methodology we promote calls for a strategy, value, and oversight committee to decide on what the company's mission critical objectives are, assign owner sponsors to report on them, assign target assessment rigor, and target assurance level. And it's those assurance levels that decide whether internal audit has any role on certain objectives. So this is demand driven. This is management with board oversight, deciding which mission critical objectives audit will play on and how much assurance they want from the audit department. Now, these are things that are not done in any companies, very few companies around the world today. So your talk about independence, well, if the board has said we want audit to give us high assurance that the risk information on mission critical objective 3 is reliable, that provides the audit department with huge independence. That they've been told that job, give us a professional opinion on the reliability of the representation that's coming from the first and second line on. Now, they, in a cybersecurity world, they would have drawn heavily on cybersecurity people if they existed within the IT department, but there would have been objectives that had to do with continuity of operation, safeguarding confidential data, all of the usual cybersecurity.
Sure. So let's break down for our audience a little bit, because you brought in some fantastic points, and I think they're really important. Not everybody is going to understand them. Like, for example, I do think assurance means something very specific in the cybersecurity world. I believe it means much the same thing in the internal audit. If you could define for the audience what assurance is and what does that look like from your perspective, it might help break down some of those A, B's, and C's for people who are not as familiar with internal audit and what those practices might be.
Well, it's a good question. And a chief information officer might be the owner sponsor of we need to ensure that our confidential data is safeguarded. And that can be more or less specific in terms of which data sets are to be safeguarded. You might want to ensure that the programs that are doing calculations and paying out money are not being hacked. And so fine. If they decided that that's of such importance that it warrants being included in the objective registry, the issue of assurance in our methodology is not the old school, get an auditor and give a binary, it's effective or ineffective. Our methodology calls for a reliable disclosure from the owner sponsor. Say the owner sponsor is the chief information security officer, and the objective is we need to safeguard our key programs that do mission critical calculations from unauthorized changes. Fair enough. That person should do that assessment at the level of target rigor, and they might disclose all kinds of flaws and holes. That data is what audit gives an opinion, not whether audit likes the state of risk being accepted, but rather has the chief information security officer reliably disclosed to the CEO and the board the state of risk being accepted with respect to those unauthorized changes. And if the answer is, well, we have low level You know, a smart high school team could hack our programs in 10 minutes. Okay, fair enough. If that's the answer, that's the answer. And then we'd say, well, how much would it cost to change it so that we at least need university grads to hack it and they take 30 minutes?
Sure.
You know, how much is it going to cost to move up our confidence that we're okay? And in our methodology, that's turning it around and saying, I'm not going to say things are fine. I'm going to tell you this is your state of risk. And I can give you assurance you're getting an accurate picture of that state of risk, which is different than saying, we like it, we're fine. You're just doing just fine. We did all your IT controls, tested them, they all came out clean on our program. No, we don't want that kind of approach to assurance. What we want is accurate data on the state of risk being accepted, and whether it comes from the owner of the system or whether it comes from the chief information security officer. We need somebody in management that's going to report on that state of risk. So we take a very different view on what assurance means in this method. Assurance is that CEO and the board are getting reliable information on risk being accepted by the business that could impact important objectives. We don't care about unimportant. I've seen IT security people that are obsessing over stuff that would never matter to anybody. From a perspective, I'm saying those people need to go and take an MBA or something. They clearly aren't looking at this through the eyes of an executive. What we want to know is entity value is at risk. And if a CIO can't give you that, that's not helpful. So fire him or her.
No, it's a big challenge. We're starting to hit on something I want to touch back up on later on, because I think it's a really critical point. But the other thing too, you've talked about these mission critical objectives, and I think that's really important. It should be from the business standpoint. One of the ways and one of the lenses that I use when I'm trying to work with the business is something called a business impact analysis. So for that, it helps with prioritization, whether you're talking about a disaster recovery plan, whether you're talking about an incident response plan. It can educate and inform the business how you want to approach certain reactions. Do you shut down a set of servers because they're hacked? Yes or no? The business could make a decision. Yes, we can, but they could make the alternate decision as well. But to me, those are very good alignment tools. And what you're talking about from a mission critical objective is also important. How would you say that they're different between the business impact analysis and a mission critical objective?
Well, they're intertwined. I mean, my case study of the implementation of objective centric was a FTSE 250 private equity company. So they were headquartered in downtown London. And if you take one of the mission critical objectives, that they be able to continue and make critical decisions and make critical payments in the event of potentially foreseeable disasters. So that was a mission critical objective. So you say, well, how did it get elevated to that list of 15? Well, it's because the business would be in enormous default in the ability not to continue under certain circumstances. So the management, and we recommend it be a strategy, value, and oversight committee. Is this big enough that it goes in the company's objective register? Well, what's the impact on the business if we can't make a payment on a fund that we've contractually said we're going to pay 50 million on Friday, and you had an event and your servers are all down, then you can't make the payment because your systems are highly dependent on IT. Well, an airline, power to the airline terminal goes up and nobody can get on or off a plane. What the hell? That's going to be considered mission critical. Okay, so what we want to do is we want to talk about impact of not achieving specific objectives, which is what you said, business impact. What's the impact on the company? Could we be in default? Could we have our right to do business taken away? Would the CEO's bonus be negatively impacted? What are all of the impacts? Could executives go to jail if this fails? A safety issue that's IT dependent. Could they go to jail because they didn't care enough to check whether, in fact, that the sensor that was supposed to be disclosing the presence of sour gas in the factory, in the sour gas plant, whether it was actually working?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, it could easily be considered a criminal negligence action against the executive and maybe even the board. So the issue is, when you decide what goes into your objective register, and we highly recommend mission critical, and if the management wants to say, hey, we don't want to stop there, we want to do more, that's great, but let's just start with the best, where the real top risks are. And a lot of them will involve IT security. As I said, I mean, I could give you,
Sure.
I mean, one of the biggest precedents in the United States is Bluebell, which has to do with food safety in an ice cream plant. Well, in today's day and age, there's going to be a lot of IT related data sets that are talking about a lot. We're moving into a world where many of the tests that they might be doing to detect food poisoning are IT driven. They're being done by IT driven machines to decide, well, what if they're wrong? Well, if they're giving false positives on food safety, we have a major problem.
Yeah.
In the case of that particular case, we might be shipping out, 10,000 cartons of ice cream that are poisoned. People are going to get sick if they eat it. So IT crosses everything, and it doesn't much matter whether the objective is we want to ensure the food we produce is safe, or in the oil and gas world, we were moving into a world where we were doing computer-driven monitoring of oil and gas flows, and measurement. Measurement was being done by IT-related applications. Now, a lot of the time, the closer we got to the coalface, the less the IT department had cared about IT security over these apps.
Yeah, absolutely. And it does depend on the organization, but I see the same story being played out over and over again, especially with operational technology. Many of us who are paying attention, we saw what happened with Clorox. They lost millions as a result of lost business. So that goes back to financial side of the house, where you look at the chief financial officer. They're going to get into definitions of materiality. And is that a material incident or not, which gets back to governance, like you report that into the Security Exchange Commission, et cetera.
The 2008 global financial crisis, you could suggest that all of the chief information security officers failed on their acceptance testing of the models they were using to predict their coverage.
That's a whole nother story, but yes.
Those were IT driven models that were telling people, are we covered here? They were terribly wrong. So when we start to expand, information security to application acceptance, it starts to bring in virtually all of the most important aspects of most companies. And it all starts with, though it shouldn't be attacked as a silo, it should be attacked as a part of an overall assessment of the risk to key business objectives.
I love that sentiment, because I totally agree. It's a matter of also positioning, because that's one of the things that's very interesting to me. And I've seen cybersecurity report into different parts of organizations. I've seen them report into internal audit. I've seen them report into IT. I've seen them report into the CEO or COO. When you're talking about the relationship, and especially when you're looking at things like, and if you could start to define it a little bit, the 3 lines model versus the 5 lines of assurance, where do you see cybersecurity as optimally fitting into an organizational structure in your view?
A little bit of history. After the 2008 crisis, IIA Europe actually decided that they were worried that as companies started to hire and staff risk departments, internal auditors were saying, well, what are we going to do given what they're going to do? And there was this massive anxiety about, what is it that they're supposed to do versus what we're supposed to do. So they created the 3 lines of defense, which I thought was a major negative at the time. I spoke about it at the time and tried to convince the IIA that shouldn't be where internal audit is positioned. It was still based on the flawed notion that audit can give binary opinions, whether controls are effective or ineffective, by looking at processes, auditing controls, and assessing risks, but not looking at what the likelihood of achieving objectives. So the flaw was there in the 3 lines of defense in 2008. 2020, the IIA realized that it was subordinating the internal audit profession. Many audit departments are being basically turned into Sarbanes-Oxley shops. Like 60–70% of the resources goes into mindless control testing using programs. And that's where the profession is slumping into. And in the audit, the IIA's 2035 survey, 70% of management see internal audit as compliance-driven police. So pretty negative image. So the IIA 3 lines in 2020, they tried to say to auditors, okay, quit just auditing the controls and looking at risks. Start to focus on the risks to objectives. So that was 2020. So much better model. At least they started to say audit.
I agree.
The first and second line, which includes cybersecurity, should focus on assessing the likelihood of achieving objectives and feeding that information up to the governing body. So much better model. IIA did not support it. They didn't provide any training on how to turn these archaic companies into more integrated focus on mission critical objectives. It didn't happen. So our approach, and we've always promoted the 5 lines of assurance in the sense that how can you say the 3 lines shouldn't include the board of directors, which is what the 3 lines model? It doesn't include the board of directors. They're not part of the framework for the company. Well, that's absurd. I mean, it's just plain technically wrong. And both the IIA 3 lines of defense and 3 lines model did not see the governing body as part of the assurance model. And it also didn't really see the CEO. So it talked about management, but you could tell that the references meant much lower management than the senior management.
Sure.
So in the model, we wanted to see senior management as the line and the board as the primary oversight. So your first line is the people with responsibility for objectives. The second lines are all of the specialty groups. An information security department, you have a safety department, you have a compliance department, you might have an anti-money laundering officer. You've got all kinds of second line people that are there to help make sure things are unfolding correctly in the first line. And then you've got the audit department, and unfortunately, the newest standards that were just released this year, they really still didn't define a clear purpose for internal audit. Give assurance. Focus on what? How much assurance? What is the assurance supposed to be? That things are fine? Doesn't define what it means by assurance. So they spent 2 years developing a purpose statement that to the average layman, you don't know why they're there. What will be different? So you don't have an audit department now. You decide to spend $1 million and create one. What will be different a year from now? It's not clear from the purpose statement. There will be a stack of audits. Okay, is that the purpose, to create a stack of audits? Why are we doing the stack of audits? That's what purpose means. Well, the IIA dodged it, wouldn't really define it. I said IIA's 3rd line, primary purpose should be to ensure that management and the board are getting a materially reliable picture of the state of risk linked to mission critical objectives.
And I think that's
on that purpose with the second line.
And I think that's a really critical, important point. Because I work with a lot of CISOs, as I spoke a little bit before this started, and there's so many CISOs that are coming in. And when you look at the major breaches that are out there, and because the CISOs that are coming in, they're very frustrated because a lot of times they can't bring that information up to senior management. They can't bring it up to the board of directors. There's always this sort of filtering process that goes on. And the lower on the food chain that the security is, the more filtering that tends to go into that up to the board of directors. And they're usually, I've worked with a lot of boards. Not all of them are willing to ask the tough questions that really do need to be asked. Some of it, I think, is education challenges. For example, I think it was the NACD put out a report that said most boards don't understand the intricacies of cyber, and they will look at compliance as a proxy for risk, but that doesn't even look at the business risk by looking at compliance. Compliance can be a checkbox. I think it has the potential to be so much more, but it's a big challenge to get beyond some of those hurdles. How do you see internal audit's role, or maybe not, in kind of changing that whole board function or changing that conversation? And how does that relate to cyber from your view?
Very important question. I don't think it's internal audit's job specifically. What you did is actually just describe the central thesis of the book I'm writing. So the working title is Don't Tell, Don't Ask Governance. And so I've been researching. The research is clear. The majority of CEOs don't want the board to make a statement. And there's a whole lot of and cybersecurity is one of them. That's one of the ones the CEO doesn't want to tell the board about. So the syndrome is called don't tell, don't ask. The research I'm doing says 95% of the boards don't want to ask because they don't want to know. And there's a whole bunch of reasons for that. And cybersecurity, sometimes we get into the CEO is reluctant to put too much information about the true state of risk because it might influence, say, insurance premiums, that there may even influence whether anybody's willing to sit on their board. So the CEOs are making sure that the board gets sanitized information. I've been in the internal audit space for 40 years. Almost all companies, it's got to go through the CEO before the board sees it.
Always, yeah.
Huge amount of sanitizing goes on before what goes through the board. Now, if you're a chief audit executive or a chief information security officer and you're passionate, you think the board really should know about this, well, you're in a career-threatening position if your CEO doesn't want them to know. It's almost suicidal for you to insist that the board gets a reliable picture of the true state of risk. So, whether you have to weigh your own, you got mortgage to pay and kids to educate and all of the things that a lot of people in their 30s and 40s have to do. Well, the challenge is how do we break that syndrome? How do we get CEOs to actually want to tell the board the true state of risk linked to mission critical objectives? And how do we get boards that want to know? And so that's the central question in my book, and it gets up to about chapter 15 before I start to lay out how can we break that syndrome? How can we change this? I call it the number one root governance flaw right now is the don't tell, don't ask syndrome. And CISOs are just one little cog in that much bigger problem.
I agree.
So, as I said, you've got a mortgage, you've got kids to raise, and you're sensing the CEO. You've just given a really hard-nosed analysis of, say it turns out your IT security system right now maybe could get by high school kids, but probably not second-year university IT grads. Okay, if that's the truth, lay it on them and lay out what it would take to move to a much better level of preparedness. Now, the CEO kicks back and you say, you've outlined your plan and the plan's going to cost an extra $5 million a year in budget money. CEO says no. But CEO doesn't want you to tell the board that they just decided no, because they need that 5 million to do something that's going to get them the bonus. And IT security isn't going to get them the bonus.
Yeah.
So we have priorities that is guiding the CEO's decisions. And in our methodology, CEO can decide any level of risk they want, except they got to be willing to tell the board. So they got to be willing to go to the board and say, look, I just turned down a proposal from our CISO, so it's going to cost 5 million to up our preventative defense levels. I didn't want to spend it. So we're just going to hope for the best next year.
Well, I think you hit on one really critical point. You didn't call it out explicitly, but I think it really shined through in everything you were saying there. It was about bias. Because if a CEO is worried about their bonus and you're saying that a cybersecurity initiative might affect that bonus, they're going to be biased against that. And so breaches don't happen to companies every single year. They just don't. Very unlikely. It might be except for like very minor cases in a few industries or, et cetera. But for the most part, they don't happen every single year. So some CEOs might hedge their bets and not want to necessarily invest in it, but they also are going to look at things from a ROI perspective. In the security world, we also like to refer to that as a ROCE, return on security investment. And whatever phrase you use to define it, though, that to me is very important because you need to explain what that is. And one of the things I see with security officers, they don't always look at that TCO, which ties into the ROI, the total cost of ownership for people who may not be aware, ties into the ROI and how it can affect the organization and ultimately how that can affect CEOs and others. So it's definitely a big problem as I see it. Have you found any solutions that work to help to get away from that bias?
Well, so the first working title of my book was called Purpose-Driven Governance, the quadrillion-dollar question. My belief is that unless your board wants reliable data on the real state of risk with mission-critical objectives, of which IT security is often an element, unless your board wants that data and is prepared to push the CEO to give it, i.e., there will be consequences to the CEO if the board finds out that the CEO is holding back on data. Now, the board can also specifically ask the chief risk officer and the chief audit executive, are we getting full, reliable reports on the state of risk linked to all key objectives that are mission critical to this company that could either add value and or erode value? Okay, clearly ransomware is an issue, right? So if it turns out, and again, you can go to AI and get them to do analysis. What's the frequency of reported ransomware incidents and what was the cost to the companies that ended up paying? How much of that was insured? You can ask AI all kinds of questions that give you more fact-based data. So then you say, okay, what's our vulnerability to ransomware? Well, they have to be able to suspend your systems and you can't restore them. Fair enough. That's the notion of ransomware. And so what you need is, remember, your chief information security officer, you're not supposed to be the main decision maker on risk.
Yeah.
It's your job. Your job should be to present the clearest, most fact-based, most business-oriented analysis to the CEO. Now, if that CEO doesn't want your board to know what you just presented to them, that's a bigger problem. So you're going to have to make some personal decisions about whether you're good with the fact that it's pretty clear to you the CEO's hiding the true state of risk related to something, if it really could have a massive material impact. Well, the long and short of it is probably are better to stay quiet because you're probably going to get sacked if the CEO even suspects.
Oh,
you're
totally. And I think that's one of the challenges in the cybersecurity space. It's that reporting. And I've seen this over and over again. But what's interesting, when you talk about things like emotional intelligence, when you want to bring somebody in, oftentimes you want competence. If you're looking for somebody that's good there, since a lot of even CIOs and technical leaders, they don't necessarily want that information to even go up the chain of command, it becomes a real problem. When you look at things like Equifax or some of these other major breaches that are out there, quite often, especially if you look at Change Healthcare too. Senator Wyden had lambasted the CEO simply because they brought in somebody with zero as a CISO who had zero experience in cybersecurity. And this pattern is repeating over and over and over again when I dive in and do a lot of these case studies, that they bring people in who think that will not rock the boat, and you're there to kind of shut up and go along with what other people want. And it's a conflict of interest because what does everybody want if you're reporting it in? You want to make people look good. And so if you're making people look good and security is there to point out, hey, great, just did this pen test, here are the issues, that sometimes can get in the way of the objective of some of what's going on in IT. So it creates a lot of challenges from a governance standpoint. How would you think the company should best approach something like that? Because that gets down to psychology, it gets down to people, it gets down to a lot of the basics of governance challenges within organizations. I've even was talking with I'll call it a Fortune 500. Their GRC program actually created a lot of toxicity, and there was a lot of animosity simply by the detection of these types of problems, and it affected the teams on both sides. So when you're looking at governance, to me, that's a very good example of not necessarily getting rid of the bias in the right way. The bias should be, hey, it's not just having the issues, but are you doing your best to resolve that? And I think that's a very interesting angle when you're looking at trust between CISOs, technical teams, and trying to figure out how do you solve this governance angle while removing some of the biases that are there. Like if the GRC program, and I don't know what happened in this particular case, said, well, you're going to lose $30,000 bonus, Mr. or Mrs. CIO. Well, I can see that creating a lot of animosity with cybersecurity. You don't want to do that. There's no way that any program is going to be perfect. But those are some of the challenges that I like to work on with organizations. How do you think you can optimize something like that?
Well, the answer isn't at the lower levels. The whole thesis of my book is that unless your board believes it's their job to oversee management's risk-taking linked to mission critical objective, it's really, you might as well just take your paycheck and try not and rock the boat. By the way, AI actually came up with that as one of the big reasons that boards don't ask CEOs. They don't want to rock the boat. If your board doesn't believe their purpose includes overseeing risk linked to mission critical objectives, almost everything else is going to be just superficial, window dressing that you're going to do. You have to have a board that wants to know the true state of risk and insists on having CEOs that are prepared to tell them. And if the CEOs that work for them are hiding, and by the way, the majority of CEOs are concealing the true state of risk linked to one or more MCOs. If we take the Wells Fargo case, there were 100 people a month being fired for creating fictitious accounts. Okay, let's start with the IT systems. Why were they able to create fictitious accounts? We go right back to the IT security was flawed from the beginning. So then we say, okay, so they're creating fictitious accounts that the customer did not authorize. This went on for 10 years, not reported to the board. Now, the CRO was personally fined, or the recommended fine for the CRO was $10 million. That's under appeal. This OCC was going to fine the chief audit executive and the number 2 audit executive $2 million. That was appealed, and they still were found to be professionally negligent and barred from serving in roles with financials. But until we can break the syndrome of CEOs that don't want to appoint, now this is a statement of fact. The majority of CEOs deliver strategic plans. Almost none of them come with rigorous risk assessment. That's a true statement of fact around the world. Now, many strategic plans involve IT complications, IT enabling, IT screw ups. So if the CEOs don't want to deliver risk assessed strategic plans and the boards are okay not getting risk assessed strategic plans, how are you going to break that syndrome? Well, I'll be honest with you, unless the regulators start calling on boards who oversee management's risk-taking linked to mission critical objectives, I don't think we're going to see a material change in this syndrome. Now, remember those stats I gave you. There will be CEOs, and I've worked for them. They share it all with them.
But some of them really care, and they're really involved.
Ugly picture and explain how the CEO has made decisions on competing priorities. And the board has thoughtfully reviewed. Okay, but that's a small minority, probably less than 10%. So then we say, okay, if AI's ChatGPT's assessment that a large percentage of CEOs don't want the board to know, and cybersecurity may be one of the bigger areas they don't want the board to have the whole truth and nothing but the truth. If the board is okay not getting the whole truth and nothing but the truth, every board could go to their CEROs and CAEs tomorrow and say, we want to know, are we getting materially reliable information on the real state of risk linked to this company's most important objective? Yes or no? And they could put them right on the spot and say, look, if you're going to be reprimanded for what you tell us, we need to know. We will protect you. We want an honest answer to that question. They don't want to ask that. They could, but they don't want to. So I've known thousands of chief audit executives and chief risk officers. Many of them know they're hiding significant risk exposures and not reporting them to the board. And they're doing it for self-preservation reasons. So we have to break that syndrome of don't tell, don't ask. We can't break that. Governance is just going to stagger along the way it's been doing.
No, I absolutely agree. And kind of funny enough, talking with different CISOs and audit executives, et cetera, from a reporting perspective, the ones that I found have been happiest have been reporting directly into the board of directors, and the board of directors has been very involved in all of those activities. They weren't reporting into the CEO because they even thought that was a conflict of interest. What's been your experience from that standpoint?
I've never seen one of those. It sounds exciting, but the whole notion, you happen to be really invested in cybersecurity, but we could talk about safety. You've got to direct safety. In an ideal world, the board is calling in the director if it's an industry where safety is something worse than paper cuts. The board should be calling and asking. We want to know what our state of. I work for clients, 5 fatalities a year. I got called into a shipyard in South Korea. That was the run rate of deaths in this shipyard. Okay. Well, clearly the board was aware there'd been 5 deaths, but they weren't getting much information on the risks being accepted when these very large crude carriers were being constructed. Until boards want to know about the state of mission critical objectives like safety, like cybersecurity, like, and as I said, cybersecurity, say you've got customer service objectives that are key in the company's mind to building market share. Well, of course, a huge component of that is IT related. And it's growing every day as companies put in AI chatbots. So, I mean, we're only going to see the reliance on IT enabling to grow with respect to the risks that it represents to mission critical objectives of all kinds. And to just focus on, we're going to just look at data security. We're just going to look at business continuity. No, look at objectives like hit our target profit this year. And if IT security breach is the #1 risk when technically evaluated in terms of not hitting your target profit and share price, let's put it into that context so it's evaluated within the context it should be, which is what's its likely potential to stop us from achieving, whether it's safety or customer service or revenue generation. IT is going to be there as a component in terms of risk or opportunity. It's not just about the bad
100%.
stuff. a large percentage of companies are not enabling opportunities in IT in order to generate their business objectives. So that's part of our methodology. Let's not just look at threats, let's look at opportunities, and let's look at a balanced picture of how do we decide which risks to take, which opportunities to exploit. That's what big picture governance is about.
Oh, that's
Too many people tackle it from a very narrow, non-business perspective. And if I was on a CEO or a board and I just heard an analysis that really didn't tell me how it's going to change my chances of hitting my target strategic plan, okay, I'll humor them and listen to them, but I don't respect them because they're not talking my language.
No, I totally agree with you, because one of the things that I see, and I even teach that in my course for CISOs, is opportunity cost, which you addressed very directly right there, and looking at that big picture, because that's what the business really cares about. And I think some of the alignment could be better if CISOs were better positioned in organizations, like working with the business leaders all the time. So at the same time, all the business leaders got something, the CISOs were. In some organizations, that is 100% true. Other organizations, CISOs are oftentimes relegated to the back office, well below where they should be. So they don't understand even the opportunity cost and what is going on from a business perspective. For me, from a governance standpoint, just including them in there so they can understand the opportunity cost is going to be important.
Yeah, in my experience, the vast majority of computer security, that they're not trained to think big picture, that they don't have that capability. So, you got to start by looking at the credentializing of those people. Are they getting sufficient training? And the course that I teach, the graduate course for the Credit Institute, look at computer security through an objective lens. As soon as they start doing that and learn how to do that, and to put the risk acceptance decisions into the context of, we need to get the share price up $2 or we're all out of work. Okay. How are we going to integrate decision making in a world like that, where we're just calling for a whole bunch more expensive computer controls? Well, you're going to have to say, here's what we can do to get by on a shoestring, and here's the risk we're going to take by operating on that shoestring. And if that's what we got to do, that's what we got to do.
100%. That makes perfect sense to me.
The big boys that are getting paid the big bucks, and they're supposed to decide. Now, they're supposed to decide being the C-suite, but they're not supposed to decide and keep it all a secret from their board.
Yeah, I totally agree. So we've got a few minutes left here. What I'd like to do is take a look at the future of the profession. Now, I know internal audit and your scope of what you look at is definitely well beyond internal audit. There's a lot of calls for bringing in AI into internal audit and automating many of the same questions. Now, there are some challenges there that I could see, like trying to identify the mission critical objectives. You'd have to identify that within an organization in order to get the right analytics. But it brings in, continuous auditing, pulling in information from both IT and different systems. I mean, there's a lot that goes into something like that. But how do you see internal audit leveraging technology to create better assurance for organizations?
Okay, so I did a post pretty much specifically on that about a month ago. The visual that I used was somebody trying to put lipstick on a pig. And I say this unequivocally, using AI to do audit the way they've been doing it, which is control-centric, process-centric, risk-centric, compliance-centric, it will only make the problem worse. Management sees them as police, it sees them as compliance agents, and using AI to do it the old way will just kill the cultures of healthy companies. So internal audit has to change and recognize that their purpose should be to ensure that management and the board are getting fit for purpose, fit for decision information on the state of risk. Very few audit departments see their purpose that way today. And until those audit departments accept that should be their purpose, and accept that management can accept any level of risk they choose to, subject only to one caveat. They have to be willing to share it with the board. And that just changes the whole dynamics of internal audit. So my take is internal auditors that start to use AI to do audit the old way, it's only going to kill the profession faster. Management's going to hate them more. Their image as police people will be intensified because AI will be, it's like, I don't know if we have a street in downtown Toronto, we put a speed camera on, and it's been handing out millions of dollars of speeding tickets, and people have been going and literally tear down the cameras, right? Well, auditors that decide they're going to use AI to be better police people are going to be like those speed cameras. They're going to get blown up and torn down, and people are going to hate them even more than they do now. And so my message to internal auditors is, you want to help your company. You want to breed healthy cultures. Healthy cultures are cultures that are prepared to share hard information all the way up to the board to make better decisions. Most audit departments are not doing that. They're not encouraging management to disclose the true state of risk. It's the reverse. They're encouraging management to keep it under the covers because they're afraid they're going to get an audit scheduled and they're going to get their asses kicked because the audit department's going to write up 15 control deficiencies, and then they're going to be nailed by the CEO who thinks he should look tough to the board on those people that are getting control deficiencies. Doesn't matter if those control deficiencies were all discussed with the CEO. So traditional audit is a killer of healthy culture. They've got to fix it, and until they do, and risk people, risk registers are the primary foundation for ERM. They're useless. They don't help make better decisions. They aren't seen as useful. They're just seen as compliance activity that they're doing for the regulator. So risk department's got to adopt a new purpose as well and new methods.
Sure. I mean, to me, you're kind of hinting at something called integrated risk management, where decisions are made partially based on risk. And that's an important part of the evolution of things. Like, I'm a big fan of having a list so you at least know what they are and understanding how that relates to business risks. And I think that's an important skill that CISOs can put in. But I agree with you, it can be a culture killer, just as I spoke about a little bit earlier, just as you had brought up as well. What is the best way? Because the auditors, when you're getting an external audit, most of them want to see you have something. Like the first time I did ERM, it was related to a compliance finding. And what happened was we did not have a business function list that we could work from, risk register, for example. So we had to create that in order to get that going. That was my first step into that years ago. But it's a big challenge from a governance standpoint. How would you stay away from that police state that you spoke about and create a better culture for organizations? And that could be, geared a little bit towards cybersecurity leaders to create a better partnership with IA and create a better partnership with other parts of the organization.
Well, if the culture could stand it, about 35 years ago, I created a culture inventory tool and 6 dimensions and the score a culture out of 60 points. It's available free on our website. The reality is, in that particular tool, if you score under 20, it's just a non-starter. You have no choice. You have to do stuff the old way. You have a culture that's not going to be supportive of continuous learning and continuous improvement. It's a compliance-driven, fear-based. People are afraid to tell what's going on to their managers and upwards. And so if your culture is wrong, you're pretty much condemned to using old school methods. However, if you want a better culture, you need to re-engineer it from the board on down. The board has to start by saying, this is a new world here. We want unvarnished,
Sure. 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 Well, we're getting close to the end. The final question I have for you, is there any advice you'd give to cybersecurity leaders to help improve their game or better work with the organization as a whole? Sure. Fair enough. Well, thank you so much. It's been a thrill having you on the show. You have a tremendous amount of wisdom and knowledge and experience. And I think that a lot of people are going to gain a lot from listening to this when we release it. So I want to thank you very much for being here today. Sure. That makes perfect sense to me. I mean, from my perspective too, like AI, as much as I like it, but if you don't know some of the answers and you don't know how to ask the intelligent questions and see when there might be some hallucination in there, AI can be definitely a big challenge. And I would actually argue a hindrance to creating good governance. Have you seen the same? Yeah, I think so. Because they do care about security. It's just a matter of extent and context and things like that. You know, nobody wants to get hit with a breach that takes out the company or close to it. It's Sure. Very much so. Well, thank you so much for your pearls of wisdom.
Security.
'That's where things are going. One 100%. Well, thank you so much. Thanks,
Yeah,
everybody. Hope that you learned a lot. Bye-bye.